My name is Lucas, and I was 25 when this happened. It was the summer of 2021, right after I lost my job and had to move back in with my uncle. He owns a large farm in a quiet patch of rural Kansas, way out past any main roads. No neighbors for miles. The kind of place where the only sounds at night are crickets, coyotes, and the wind moving through the cornfields. My uncle offered me a place to stay in exchange for helping him around the farm, fixing fences, checking irrigation, the kind of thing. I figured the fresh air and distance from the city would do me some good. I needed the reset. For the first few weeks, it actually wasn't bad. Long days, peaceful evenings, clear night skies. That silence out there felt like therapy. But then, during my third week, things started getting weird. It started with the dog, my uncle's dog, Murphy, a big golden retriever who never barked at anything, suddenly started acting strange. Every night around 11 p.m., he would stand by the back door, growling low, ears pinned back, staring out toward the cornfield behind the barn. It wasn't the usual coyotes nearby growl. This was different. He wouldn't move, wouldn't respond to his name. Just stood there, tense, watching the same spot every night. At first, we thought it might be a raccoon or a fox. My uncle even fired a couple of warning shots into the air to scare off whatever it was, but it didn't stop. Every night, same time, same spot. And then came the screaming. The first night I heard it, I was in bed. It was just after midnight. I had my window open, trying to catch a breeze. I remember the moon was bright, the cornfield looked silver. And then, through the stillness, I heard this awful, shrill scream coming from the field. It didn't sound like an animal, not a coyote, not a fox, not anything I'd ever heard before. It sounded human, but not right, twisted, like someone trying to imitate a human scream, but getting it horribly wrong. It echoed across the field, long and loud, then stopped. I froze, didn't move a muscle. Then Murphy started barking full on, Lassen Hisman barking. I jumped out of bed, ran to the window, but I couldn't see anything in the corn. The next morning, I asked my uncle if he'd heard it. He didn't answer at first, just sipped his coffee, and said, "Yeah, it's not the first time." That's all he said. I pressed him, but he just shook his head and told me to stay inside after dark from now on. I could tell he was hiding something. The screaming came again the next night. Same time I tried recording it on my phone, but for some reason it didn't capture anything, just static. It got worse over the next few nights. Closer, louder, one night, it sounded like it was just beyond the back fence. I decided I'd had enough. I grabbed a flashlight and headed out with Murphy. My uncle wasn't home that night, had gone into town for supplies, and wouldn't be back until the next morning. I figured I'd at least try to catch a glimpse of whatever it was. Murphy didn't want to go. He kept pulling at the leash, whining, refusing to cross into the cornfield. I had to carry him halfway. The corn was tall, well over my head, and the path was narrow. I kept the flashlight aimed straight ahead, but the beam barely cut through the thick stalk. About 10 minutes in, I heard something moving out ahead of me, but off to the side. Something big. The corn rustled violently, then stopped. I spun around, shining the light in every direction. Nothing. Then came the scream. It was right behind me, just feet away. I turned so fast, I nearly dropped the light. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear breathing, heavy, wet, ragged. It was so close. I turned and ran, crashing through the stalks, Murphy right on my heels. I didn't stop until I got back to the house, slammed the door shut, and locked every window. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with a kitchen knife in one hand and Murphy curled up at my feet, still shaking. When my uncle got back the next morning, I told him everything. He didn't seem surprised. He sat me down and said, "There's something old in those fields. Older than this house, older than this farm. We don't go looking for it. We just stay inside and wait for it to pass." I asked what it was. He said no one really knows. Some folks say it's a spirit. Others say it's a man who got lost in the fields decades ago. Driven mad, never found his way out, but the way he looked at me, I think he knew more than he was saying. I stayed one more week before packing my things on my last night. The screaming didn't come from the field, it came from the porch. 3 long screams, right outside the front door. I didn't open it. I just sat there in the dark, holding that same kitchen knife, listening to the silence that followed. And in the morning, there were muddy footprints leading up to the door. Only one set bare feet. My name is Danielle. I'm 32 now, but this happened when I was 19. I had just graduated high school the year before, and I was in that awkward phase of not really knowing what to do next. College wasn't for me, and I didn't have money to move out, so I stayed behind while most of my friends left town and moved in with my aunt and uncle, who had a small farm outside of Fayette, Missouri. They were good to me, gave me a room upstairs, and paid me to help out around the property. Mostly chores, taking care of the chickens, helping in the garden, that sort of thing. It was quiet, peaceful, a good place to think. Their house sat on the edge of about 30 acres, bordered by a thick tree line that curved around the property. Past the woods was just empty land, fields that hadn't been farmed in years, left to overgrow. My uncle told me that whole area used to belong to an old man named Cole Simmons, but the land was never sold after he passed, and now it just sat there, collecting weeds and stories. I stayed with them from spring into late summer. It wasn't until mid-July that I started noticing something strange. It began one evening after dinner. I was finishing up with the chickens, locking up the coop, when I noticed a man standing by the fence line. I thought maybe it was a neighbor. He was far enough that I couldn't make out his face, but I could tell he was tall, thin, and still, very still. He was facing the house, just watching. I waved. He didn't move. I remember standing there for a moment, waiting for him to do something, but he just stood at the edge of the field, backlit by the orange sunset. I looked away for half a second to call out to my uncle, and when I turned back, he was gone. I told my uncle about it, and he frowned. He didn't say anything at first. Then he asked if the man was standing on the Simmons property side of the fence. I said yes. All he said was, "You see him again, don't go near." That night, I had trouble sleeping. I kept thinking about that figure, the way he stood, stiff and unnatural, like a scarecrow someone forgot to take down. I got up around 2 a.m. to get a glass of water as I was heading back to bed. I passed the upstairs hallway window and I saw him again. He was standing in the same spot, same posture, facing the house, but this time it was pitch black outside. No moon, no stars, just him. Alone in the dark, I stood there, frozen, staring out the glass. Then he moved. Not a step forward, not exactly. It was more like a jolt, like someone shifting all their weight at once. He twitched, then took one long, wide step along the fence line. Still facing the house, I backed away from the window and shut the curtain. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I asked my aunt if she'd ever seen anyone out by that fence. She gave me this long, tired look and asked, "Did he wave at you?" I said no. She said, "Good. If he ever does, don't wave back." Her voice was serious, unshakably calm, like she'd been waiting years to say that. The next few nights were quiet, but something still felt off. Murphy's farm dog started refusing to go outside after dark. He'd whine at the back door and hide under the table whenever I tried to get him out for his nightly walk. That was a red flag. Then one night, I was brushing my teeth before bed. The bathroom window was cracked open for ventilation. I heard something through it. It was humming, not a song I recognized. More like the kind of tuneless sound someone makes when they're trying to calm themselves down. Low, slow, unsteady. I turned off the water and leaned closer. The humming was coming from outside. From the direction of the field, I ran to the hallway window. He was there again. Closer this time. Standing at the fence post closest to the barn, he was humming. I could see more detail now. His head was tilted slightly to one side. His arms hung stiffly at his sides, and even from a distance, I could tell something was wrong with the shape of him. His proportions were off, like he was stretched too tall. His limbs looked too long, like something trying to look human but not quite pulling it off. Shut the curtain and didn't look again. That night, I locked my bedroom door, something I had never done before on the farm. I pushed the dresser in front of it and kept the lamp on. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to a sound I couldn't place. It wasn't a knock, not quite footsteps. More like tapping, repetitive, soft, deliberate. It was coming from the wall, behind my bed, the wall that faced the backyard. Tap, tap, tap. Then a pause. Then a voice. It was muffled, barely above a whisper. But I swear to God, it came from just outside the wall and it said my name 3 times. Danielle, Danielle, Danielle. I didn't move. I just lay there, heart pounding, trying not to breathe. Then nothing. Silence for the rest of the night when the sun finally came up. I told my uncle everything. I expected him to tell me I was dreaming, but he didn't. He just nodded and said, "That's his way. He picks someone every couple years." "What does he want?" I asked. He just shook his head. "Nobody knows." "But you don't let him in. You don't talk to him, and you never go into the field." I didn't need to be told twice. That afternoon, I packed my bags and left. I called my cousin in Louis and moved in with her. The next day, I never looked back. A year later, I visited for Thanksgiving. Just a short trip. He stayed one night. As I was leaving, my aunt handed me a small wooden box. Inside was a folded piece of paper with shaky handwriting. It was a letter from her grandmother. It read, "There is a man who lives between the rows. He walks the fence, waits for a name. He hums to lure, knocks to tempt. Don't go. Don't follow. Don't answer. If he calls, close your eyes." That was it. Just a warning passed down like a recipe, like an old family rule. I don't know what's out there, but whatever it is, it's old, it's patient, and it's watching. My name is Rachel. I was 30 when this happened. I'd just come out of a really messy breakup. The kind that leaves you drained mentally, emotionally, everything. I needed to reset, so when a friend from college offered me a chance to house sit, their family's old property in rural Virginia, I said yes without hesitation. It was a small, single-story home sitting near a creek, surrounded by woods, real isolated, no neighbors, just trees, silence, and time to think. It sounded perfect. They told me it used to belong to their grandfather, but after he passed, no one lived there full-time. It had electricity and running water, but barely any cell signal. I didn't mind, that was the point. I arrived in early spring, the kind of weather where everything smells like earth and the cold hasn't quite left yet. The house was plain but cozy. 1 bedroom, a wood stove, a big porch out back that overlooked the creek about 50 yards away. It didn't take long to settle in for the first few days. It felt like a retreat. I'd wake up to birdsong, spend my afternoons reading on the porch, and fall asleep to the sound of the creek. But on the 6th night, something changed. It started with the light. I had just finished brushing my teeth and was walking back to bed when I saw it through the window, a faint glow coming from the trees across the creek at first. I thought it might be someone with a flashlight, but the light didn't move. It just hovered there, flickering gently like a lantern. It looked old-fashioned, soft and golden, not cold and blue like LED. I stared at it for a while. It didn't do anything, just hovered in the same spot. I told myself it was nothing, maybe a reflection, maybe moonlight hitting something weird. But the next night, it was back, same spot, same glow, only this time it moved. It drifted slowly between the trees. Not fast, not aggressive, just moving, like it was being carried by someone walking along the creek's edge. I watched it for a long time. My gut told me not to go outside, but part of me wanted to. There was something hypnotic about it. Eventually, I closed the curtains and tried to sleep, but I couldn't. The light stayed in my head. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see it flickering behind my eyelids. I finally dozed off sometime after 2 a.m., and then, around 3:30, I woke up sudden lino noise. No dream, just this feeling like I wasn't alone. I sat up in bed. The glow was right outside the window, not across the creek anymore. It was on the porch. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I just stared at the curtain, which was now glowing softly from behind. I remember thinking, if I look, if I even peek, something terrible will happen. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen. Eventually the light faded, like it was moving away. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I walked down to the creek. I had to. I needed to see if there were any signs, footprints, trash, anything to prove that someone had actually been there. I found nothing. No prints, no burned out lantern, no evidence of anything. But as I stood there by the water, something caught my eye on the opposite bank. There was an old tree stump with some kind of carving on it. I waded across and took a closer look. It was a name, faded, almost worn away. E. Grant 1906. Below the name were the words, "Keep the light burning." I didn't know what that meant. I took a picture of it with my phone and sent it to my friend one who owned the place. They texted back later that day. I totally forgot about that. My grandfather used to say that phrase all the time when we stayed there. He'd light an old oil lantern at night and leave it by the creek. Said it was for the man in the woods. Creepy stuff. I didn't respond. That night, I left every light on in the house, but it didn't help. At 3:17 a.m., I woke up again. The glow was back, this time in the living room. It was inside the house. I heard a soft clinking sound, like glass tapping against metal. I stayed in bed, covers pulled up to my chin, my heart pounding so loud it felt like it would shake the walls. And then, footsteps slow, measured, like someone walking barefoot on the wood floor. They stopped outside my door. The light pulled under. The crack at the bottom, I could see it moving slightly, flickering. Then, a knock, soft, just once. I didn't answer. The light stayed there for maybe a minute, then drifted away. I heard the screen door creak open, then shut. The next morning, I packed my things. I left the house exactly as I found it. I didn't tell my friend what happened. I didn't want to hear some family story about ghosts or traditions or warnings I had ignored. But I did leave one thing behind. On the stump by the creek, I placed an old lantern I found in the shed. I lit it, and walked away. My name is Mark. I grew up in a farming town in Nebraska, Appalachian, maybe 500 on a good year. Not much ever happened there. Folks worked their land, stayed to themselves, and waved from their porches. That was about it. When I was 22, I moved back home for a bit after college. My dad had just passed, and my mum needed help running the Propertina thing massive. Just a few acres and a couple of barns. I took the spare room and started helping her out while I looked for a job. It felt strange being back. The town hadn't changed much, but I had the silence hit differently now. The flat land stretching for miles made you feel like you were the only person left on Earth. One evening in late August, I was driving back from a nearby hardware store. It was nearly dusk, and as I turned down the dirt road toward our house, I saw something that made me slow down. A man was standing in the middle of the field across from ours, just standing there. Not working, not moving, just watching. He wasn't close, but I could see him clear enough. He was wearing overalls, no shirt underneath, and one of those wide straw hats that farmers sometimes wear. His face was in shadow, and he wasn't holding any tools. He was just facing our house, watching. I assumed he was a neighbor. I didn't. No, maybe new to town. I gave him a nod through the windshield as I passed. He didn't move, didn't even flinch. That night, as we ate dinner, I mentioned the guy in the field. My mum paused mid-bite, then set her fork down. Which field? She asked. The Harper field across from us. She stared at me a second longer than I liked, then said quietly, "There's no one living on the Harper place, hasn't been for years." I didn't push her. She had a way of ending conversations without saying anything more. The next evening, I looked out the window around the same time. He was there again, same spot, same hat, same posture. I grabbed the binoculars from the shelf. When I zoomed in, I realized something was off. His face wasn't just shadowed, it was wrong. His features were indistinct, like they'd been smudged. I could barely make out eyes or a nose. The whole thing looked melted. I lowered the binoculars and looked again with my own eyes. His face looked normal. I checked through the lenses once. More melted. I didn't sleep well that night. The next day, I asked around town, stopped by the gas station, talked to a couple of the older guys sipping coffee outside. "You ever see someone out by the Harper place lately?" One guy, Mr. Landry, nodded slowly. "You seen him, huh?" I asked who he was. Landry just muttered, "He shows up sometimes. Don't go out there and don't wave." That last part struck me. I hadn't told anyone I waved back at the house. I asked my mum directly. She didn't answer at first. Then she said something I'll never forget. "Your father saw him too, right before he got sick." She didn't elaborate. That night, I sat on the porch after sunset, watching the field. Sure enough, the man appeared, but this time, he was closer, maybe 30 feet into the field, not far from the road, still watching. Didn't move, just stared back. It felt like a test. Somehow, then, very slowly, he raised one arm and waved. It was a stiff wave, like the joints didn't work right. His hand moved side to side in this weird mechanical motion. I felt my body go cold. I didn't wave back. Instead, I stood up and walked inside. I locked the door and shut the blinds. I stayed up until sunrise the next morning. I went across the road to check the spot where he'd stood. There were no footprints, just a small patch of dried, brittle grass where everything else was green. Over the next few days, he came closer, first at the edge of the field, then near the fence, always just standing, watching, never moving unless I looked away for a second. Then he'd be closer. I stopped going outside after dark. I started keeping a light on in every room. My mum didn't say anything, but I could tell she noticed. I think she had her own ways of dealing with it. One night, during a thunderstorm, there was a knock at the door, not loud, just a few light taps. I froze. The power was out. No lights, no sound except for the storm and that knock. I didn't move. Then I heard something that didn't fit. A voice, faint, from the porch. Not a full sentence, just a whisper through the rain. You waved. My blood ran cold. I never waved, not really. Just that first time, for I knew what he was. I don't remember going to bed that night. I just remember waking up on the floor, soaked in sweat. The front door still locked. The man never came back after that storm, not once. But a week later, our neighbor Mr. Collins, 3 houses down, collapsed in his backyard, heart failure. They found him just past the fence, lying face up, eyes wide open. The weird part, his wife said the night before, he kept staring out the back window. Said he saw a man standing in their soybean field, wearing a wide straw hat. My name is Eli. I grew up in rural Tennessee, not far from a place most folks around here just call the Ridge. It's nothing special, just a stretch of hill country dotted with trees, farms, and the occasional collapsing barn. My family owned a modest plot of land at the edge of it, big enough for a few cows and an orchard, but not much else. After my parents passed, the property was left to me. I didn't go back for a while, too many memories, but eventually I needed time away from everything, and the house was just sitting there. So I took a leave of absence from my job and went back to the Ridge, thinking I'd stay a few weeks, fix the porch, paint the walls, sort through the attic. I made it 6 days. The first few were peaceful, waking up to fog on the field, hearing nothing but birds and wind. It reminded me of being a kid again, simple, quiet mornings. But on the 3rd day, I wandered out past the orchard and noticed something I hadn't remembered. A well. It sat just beyond the last row of trees, half covered in vines and moss. The stone was chipped, the wooden cover warped and sagging. I must have seen it 100 times as a kid, but somehow I had completely forgotten it existed. I didn't think much of it at the time until that night. Around 2 a.m., I woke up suddenly, not to a noise, but to a feeling, a pull, like something was urging me to look outside, so I did. I pulled the curtain open and scanned the backyard, and that's when I saw her, a woman, standing next to the well. She was facing it, not moving, barely visible in the moonlight. Her dress was long and torn, her hair hung wet and tangled. I thought maybe I was dreaming. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but when I looked again, she was still there, staring into the well. I didn't go outside. I watched from the window until dawn. When the sun rose, she was gone. I told myself it was a trick of the light. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe it was just fog, the branches, something my brain twisted into a person. But that afternoon, I went back to the well. There were footprints in the dirt, bare feet, leading to the edge and nowhere else. The next night, I sat up on the porch with a flashlight. I didn't want to believe it, but I needed to be sure. At exactly 2:12 a.m., I heard something. A splash, like someone had dropped a heavy stone into water. I crept out into the yard, flashlight shaking in my hand. The sound had come from the well. I stopped just short of it. The beam of my flashlight barely reached over the lit dot. I called out, "Hello," no response. Then I heard breathing, deep, ragged, uneven. It was coming from inside the well. I backed away. I didn't sleep that night. Next morning, I drove into town to ask around. I found the oldest guy I knew, LeMay, who ran the hardware store for as long as I could remember. I told him about the well. He got real quiet then, he said. Your grandfather had that sealed. I asked why. He looked me in the eye and said, because things came out of it. He told me when my grandfather first moved onto the land, the well was open one night. He came out to find his chickens dead and the barn door ripped clean off its hinges. He followed the tracks back to the well and found the cover off. Like something had climbed out the next day, he covered it with concrete. Apparently, the slab eventually cracked. I didn't believe it, I wanted to laugh, honestly, but when I got back to the property, I looked at the edge of the well again. And there, it were chunks of old, broken concrete scattered in the weeds. I spent the rest of that day boarding it shut, nails, chains, bolts. Everything I could think of. I even hung an old crucifix over the top for good measure. Call it superstition. That night, I sat up again, and right on time to 12 me heard it. Not a splash this time, knocking from underneath the boards. 3 knocks. Then silence. Then a woman's voice, low and distant. Please help me. I didn't answer. I didn't move. The next morning, the boards were untouched, but the crucifix was gone. Gone, not fallen. Gone. I left that same day, drove 6 hours straight, and never looked back. Sometimes, though, I still wake up around 2:12 my heart pounding, and once in a while, just once in a while, dream of a woman at the bottom of a well, looking up and smiling. Out here in the countryside, silence isn't always safe. If you hear your name whispered after midnight, don't answer. If you want more true horror stories, subscribe and don't wander too far from the light.